Hey folks, December 13th, 2020. Going to take a little tour of the Oregon City layout. It's been, since February since I did a layout tour. So we'll just take a look. We'll start here on the right and do kind of an overview. So this is just a spare bedroom in our house. And we put up an N-scale layout. So over on this side, as you come into the right, this is the high Cascades. And we'll look at some of this as we go along. It's our mountainous area of the layout. We have a sawmill up here along Oregon Route 58 up along the McKenzie River. Got our rural scene, Mount Hood watching over everything like it does. Come over here to Oregon City, Blue Heron Paper Company, the different layers of Oregon City. We'll come through all this. Clackamas River, High Rocks area. Then an area, my grade crossing area that can pass for both Canby, Oregon with the Depot Museum and caboose, and then just placing mics in the same spot. You can have mics driving in Milwaukie. Then this is representing Brooklyn Yard in southeast Portland, or for some reason a 90s Coast Starlight's backing in, which normally doesn't happen, but gives me a chance to run that cool F-59. Then we'll move over here to the roundhouse in southeast Portland. Layout set in the late 90s. That was a transition year for Southern Pacific because they'd actually been bought by Denver and Rio Grande Western in 1988, and then Union Pacific finished grabbing them in 96. So in the 90s, you could see about anything. You could see Rio Grande engines, UP, SP. I don't know why I had them sitting here, but I saw Kodachrome engines all the way up into the 2000s. In the 90s, you saw new power. You saw 80s power. And you even saw 50s power. You could see about anything up here. One of the stories I wrote in Trains talked about seeing a lash up of 5 or 6 of these SD9s rail fanning with my little boy. And, that was just a common occurrence. You see those big Cadillacs moving along. I built enough tracks here so that it's basically like car storage and visible staging. It's not obviously to scale or anything, and in fact, it's an intermodal yard now, and the roundhouse is gone. But some people look and say, "Gosh, dude, you're making the mistake of mixing steam and diesel and all this different stuff." This is the way it was. SP 4449 is owned by the city of Portland, and it lived at the Brooklyn Roundhouse until they built the Oregon Rail Heritage Center a few years ago. And inside of it was the SP&S 700 and the Oregon Navigation Railway Company 197, and they're still there up at the Oregon Rail Heritage Center. But you could see after 2000, Doyle McCormick brought up a Alco PA from Mexico. It's now nickel plate 190, and it's beautiful. You can see it on a video from a couple of weeks ago. But I liked modeling what it looked like when it came up, and it looked terrible, but it still had D&H coloring on it. It used to be Santa Fe 62L, then D&H 18. And then you're like, well, what's with the F unit? Well, Doyle bought and restored a Great Northern F7, and it lives now every day at the Oregon Coast Scenic Railroad. It's landlocked because of storms. Maybe it can get back out. But if you came into Portland on the train and you looked over at the roundhouse, you could see stuff like this every day. It's kind of like a time warp. And then you saw excursion equipment from the daylight cars. Empire Builder cars that the Pacific Northwest chapter of the NRHS owns. So you can see these things. And then I made a fuel rack where trains can come around and pull up and get their diesel. This Rio Grande, I made a video on that because it was one of those cheap Southern Pacific high-speed dummies that Reader's Digest had. Some flat black paint, a set of Rio Grande decals, some new couplers, and changing the wheels out, and you got a fine running dummy, for about $8 from Microscale. I put a few buildings over here just to kind of represent Southeast Portland. Of course, Southeast Portland is represented now by blue tarp cities and villages. But I put some of the real building photos in the background on the back wall. So when the Coast Starlight rolls through, it's got a real background. KGN radio tower up in Hillsdale. The idea being, when you were at the roundhouse back in the day, when I'd take my son there, that's kind of the view you had. In the background was the green hills of Portland and the radio towers. And so without being real fancy, that's what I replicated. I did set up, and I did a video on putting that street level running in, and I even see if we can get it without the flash. There's abandoned track in the middle of the road there, because that's what it's like in Southeast Portland. Yeah, there they are. You'll be going along and you can see what a fine looking 72 Roadrunner. Anyway, so that's Southeast Portland. We'll move along. So this area here that can become Mike's or the Canby Depot, all I have to do, move the buildings around. Canby Depot, Mike's Drive-In. And then he goes in here, move some cars around, get rid of the caboose, and then poof, it becomes Mike's. I like my little depot museum sign that I recreated over there. You can see that on the prototype. But I can just move things around and if I decide I want to have the train come through Mike's, I can set this up and set up the cars right. And if it's the Canby Depot, you move the cars around, you set it down, you set up the caboose right, and then there you go. Just depends on what I want to film. Clackamas River, High Rocks, AMR, Lifeguard Shack, people canoeing, people fly fishing. You can't see this view though because Interstate 205 blocks it, unfortunately. It's got a little neighborhood up here. And then Oregon City, the lower level next to the Willamette River. Slow him down a little bit. Now there's street running here because there was in the 90s. And here, this is pretty much, when a train goes by, if you're down on Main Street in Oregon City, this is what it's going to look like. It goes on top of the entrance to the elevator. And that's what I was shooting for. So you do have street running here. In the 90s, I used to get stabbed coming home because there'd usually be two SW1500s switching the paper company around. I did fire this up. I'm not huge into switching and operations and stuff, but I powered the tracks up and the trains will run down. My SP switcher is very finicky, and in fact I'm going to have to tear it apart. But it will. You can have the street running down here. The mill area represents just a little bit of, I think it was 22 acres. But all these buildings you can move around for filming. And I should probably tear all this out and do it again, because I did take the lead out, but it's very steep and it runs up there, which is similar. I built the elevator, which Oregon City built in 1955. I scratch built that. It's not perfectly to scale. The observation area is a little bit too big, but I don't care. It's the only one like it in the U.S. So come over here. We've got our cornfield, one of my favorite views. Mount Hood looking majestically over the Willamette Valley. Some horses, they don't even pay attention to the slow-moving freight. It's Oregon. You gotta have a junk rusted car out and back. It's like a 63 wagon. Farmhouse. Sunflowers. My wife Carla did almost all of this garden. Did a really great job on it. And you got some fields. We got cattle. We got pigs. We got geese. We got all kinds of stuff. And we got a red block. Actually, it's nice for once. It wasn't actually a derailment or something. It was just there's no grades on this layout by design, but things have shifted where this corner here has kind of become a low point. So if you have one engine and quite a few heavy cars, sometimes you got to give it a little more gas coming up here. But the only real grade is this lead up to there, and I don't have it powered up right now. But we'll come over here. We got the Christmas tree farm, of course, because it's Oregon. Got our mill. Did a couple versions of that. Because at first it was just kind of like for a diorama. And then I decided, well, let's power it up. Let's put a good switch on it. Did that. And it didn't work great. So finally pulled that all out. Got rid of the bad switch. Abandoned the track, just like in a regular industry. People playing around on the stacks of wood, wondering why an Alco RS11 dummy is there. Like every industry around on the line, its storage is an old boxcar. Kids must have come over and knocked over the toilet. Got campers in the forest. And you got your SP rolling around. One little detail I put on here, and I made a video about it, was I was in Bonner, Montana in October, and there was heavy snow, and by a switch they had a broom that was attached to a railroad crossing for them to brush out the switch. And I'm trying to focus right, and it just doesn't seem to want to do it. But I built one, found an N-scale figure with a broom, which was harder than heck. And then just put it on there. It's just one of those little details that real life has. My extension over here, it was just cardboard I built off site. Put on ground cover, trees, glued that on. Car they didn't bother getting after a derailment. Railroad ties and such. But what's nice is it gives this area, I call it Tunnel 3, a 3D effect. You can film from here, you can film the trains coming by. And as you move back, it just kind of morphs into just the painted background. See a little forest fire smoke, Mount Jefferson. I painted the clouds. It's just some white over sky blue. Summertime, so there's cumulonimbus building out over the Cascades. Remember when you used to fly? A couple of jets moving back and forth to Seattle. Here we get our freight charging up to 1% grade in Oregon City. Coming right along. So I like filming at ground level, not up above like I'm following a model train. I like to do like I'm a rail fan, seeing what's really going on from my level. So that's pretty much the layout. Any of you guys that follow my channel, you'll know that I run different eras and different railroads once in a while. I've got some Portland and Western engines here, and I'll run locals around. I've got some 40s and 50s SP. Every once in a while I get a hankering to run that. Some Alco PAs. Every once in a while I even want to run some Burlington Northern. So I'll have some of those. And you'll see some of them just shells. A lot of times I trade shells on chassis. So back here are a couple of those dummies, those high-speed dummies. That one I painted up to go like a David Lustig photo in Trains magazine of a completely washed out one with a patch over. A couple Burlington and E7 and the E8. I think I did that one for Amtrak. Yeah, like an early patch over. They rented it. So every once in a while I'll run those. And then if you've watched my channel, you know I like Rainbow Era. So some Amtrak E8s, both paint schemes. And then I grew up along the Southern Railway outside Washington, D.C. at milepost 17. And so I grew up watching Southern and then some Chessie. So every once in a while I'll run some Chessie. Gives me a good reason to have a Western Maryland F7. Different Amtraks from the 70s. Good old SDP-40F, F40, and then some later Genesis engines. But then I grew up watching all these running long nose forward on freights. And then every day I'd see Southern number 5 and number 6, the Piedmont, back and forth to Charlotte from DC. And every morning and every evening, train number 1, train number 2, Southern Crescent, 4 E8s. I made the bicentennial decals that they wore in '76. Zoom in a little bit here. I took pictures of the real ones, shrunk them down, put them on there. And no, I didn't make 17 different ones for the different signers. But the F7s, or the FP7s, my wife got me 2 of the Bachmann Stallion Norfolk Southern train sets. They had this, they each had an engine. They had a caboose, I think a tank car, and something else. But I got them for the engines, because what I did, I just got the microscale decals for an FP7, got rid of the horse on the front, put the right decals on them, put the nose heralds on them like they were, and they look just as bad as they did in 1976 when I'd see them come by. They ran until Thanksgiving weekend. And I numbered them up correctly, 6146 and 6148. And when I put N-scale decals in the number board, that's when I curse myself and my decision to do N-scale. I should have done O, like most older guys. But anyway, that's some of the extra locomotives I run. And then some of the other videos you've seen, they show the storage and stuff. So our trusty Dash 9, been pulling like a big dog all day, pulling these. We're going to give him a rest. I'm going to let him come into the yard. Hope you had a good time on the tour, and we'll talk to you soon.